Good morning. The Prime Minister of Canada is in China, and the purpose of the 4-day trip is not to protest against human rights, but to ensure greater trade. Nothing wrong with that. But when you sacrifice your principles, and that too for the non-existent returns, then there is something wrong somewhere. I recollect in 2013, the present Prime Minister, then the leader of the opposition, was asked which country he admires most. And he had responded, China, because of its basic dictatorship. Amazing that the leader of a democratic country should be so fond of a dictatorship. Maybe that's the desire, the inner desire of Prime Minister Trudeau to be a mini President Z. But anyway, let's leave that. Coming to the free trade, there are two aspects. One is the Canadian emphasis on human rights. Secondly, the harmful effects of this agreement. In 2013, again, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, now called the Global Affairs, had commissioned Center for the Study of Living Standards to study the feasibility of free trade with China. And it was found that in case there is a free trade with China, Canada would suffer a job loss of 100,000. 100,000 people would go out of jobs. 100,000 families would be unemployed. And there is no proof, the report said, that the trade would in any way be beneficial to Canada. Now, should we have trade? Or should the examples of the other countries be our guiding principles? First, let's take up the Canadian values. Nobody can deny that the Chinese have an authoritarian dictatorship, which is okay. I have no problem with that. And I'm the last one to preach anybody on the system of the government they have. But it is only last month that Justin Trudeau had visited Philippines and criticized and condemned President Duterte about the judicial killings, non-judicial killings, extrajudicial killings, and also judicial killings because he thought that the judicial system is warped. China's record is much worse. So is it the policy of the government to condemn those who are weaker than you are and to flatter those who are more strong than you are? There seems to be some truth in that. Nobody condemned Saudi Arabia, and we sold billions of dollars worth of goods to Saudi Arabia. But we condemn Philippines. Nobody condemns China, but we condemn Myanmar for Rohingyas. Why this duplicity and double policy? China has no free press. The country is worst in the world for the internal freedom, censoring the citizens and monitoring the communication. And now, do you know the latest thing which is happening in China? They are working on facial recognition system that will track every one of their 1.3 billion people via a network of cameras that will be able to ID the faces within 3 seconds with an accuracy of 88%. The problem with China is a different one. Normally, as in Myanmar, as in Philippines, your attitude stops at the borders. But China uses its diaspora overseas as well. United Front work here in Canada is a front for the Communist Party. And the latest party meeting in China in October, it was very clear that the Chinese people anywhere in the world have to work for China. Their nationality is by ethnicity, not by the country in which they live in. The unifying factor is that they are of Chinese origin. And with this wide-ranging oppression, is it desirable for us to have free trade agreement? You know, there's a famous writer, Clive Hamilton. He's a professor in Australia. And he mentions Chinese efforts to exploit the diaspora in Australia. And how they do it? Very sensibly. They fund the education system and push the Chinese language media to sing the praise of Beijing. The book was published, and within 1 month it was withdrawn because the Chinese government ordered the publisher not to go ahead with the sale of the book. Here in Canada ourselves, we have seen the ethnic Chinese individuals like Denzin Wong, and he's a consular in Toronto, Canadian-born son of a Chinese immigrant, and he was exposed to Chinese pressure when he wanted to visit Taiwan. And the reports are there that the Chinese are funding the visits of MPs and senators, which is unethical in any country that would be deemed to be a corrupt practice. We have seen what's happening in USA. Any foreign countries subsidizing or paying for the trips of the legislators and giving them the goodies as present is a precursor to suborning them, bringing them under your impact, under your influence, and then using them to get the best terms. We think that by having a free trade agreement with China, we'll be exploiting a market of 1.3 billion people. But these people are already being exploited by their own government. Their consumption pattern is not by, repeat, not by their own volition, by their own desires, but by the dictates of the government. And until the government changes there, nothing can be done. Now let's come to the other side, the economic side. What can we export to China? Lentils they don't need, wheat they don't need. So what is left is our minerals and raw materials. Should we be exporting them in raw form? Finished product they don't need. 75% minimum in the finished goods of industrial consumption, and 98% of the finished good in the consumer durables in Canada are coming from China already. Now, with that being the case, what would we gain except for a loss of 100,000 jobs? Because whatever we are producing in our own way will be supplanted. Now look at salmon. We got crazy about Atlantic salmon, but the salmon that you are getting in these superstores is a Canadian salmon, harvested, caught, processed and packed in China already. Now, if that is the case, how further can we go down? A free trade agreement is signed so that it results in a win-win situation. We in Canada already have a negative balance of trade and negative balance of payments with China. Having a free trade agreement would enhance that negative aspect. We need, in fact, a restrictive trade with China where the matters of daily consumption are taxed heavily so that the same can be produced here in Canada. Now tell me, what problem is there if we process our own lobster, our own salmon, our own bass, our own tilapia, instead of the Chinese motherships coming down, harvesting them, take them back, process them, pack them, and resend them to you? The plea often taken is, it's economically not viable. If it's not economically viable for Canada, how is it viable for China, who spend much more in fuel, traveling, manpower, and insurance costs by catching the product here, taking it to the mainland China, processing and bringing it back out duly packed? As a matter of fact, we do not have a level playing field, and the object of the trade should be to ensure a level playing field between the entrepreneurs here in Canada and in China. Now, the government of Canada is in the process of legalizing cannabis. The day you do it, if you have a free trade, you would see that the complete cannabis production and processing would be owned by the Chinese. Just today morning, a Chinese company announced that they want to build indoor vertical farms next to each city, each mega city, and they have plans of building 500 such farms. The result would be that these vertical farms, the production would be so high that the local agriculture production in those countries would suffer badly. If they were supplemental, there would be no problem. But they are going to be competitive. And with a large-scale agrarian system and indoor farms, vertical farms, about which I had talked sometime earlier, would be a disaster for the countries which accept that offer. And you can be sure by the end of the year, because the terms they are giving are very clear, they say that whatever you invest, you get 75% return in first 2 years. So ROI is so high. Because once you have a vertical farm next to a mega city, your cost of transportation is nil. Land, because it's a vertical farm, where 1,000 acres are required, you just need 5 acres. So the land price is much too low. And they are going to use the solar system or other renewable energies or waste utilization, so that the energy costs are next to nothing. You have a free trade agreement. And next you would see Winnipeg, Montreal, Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, and few other cities like Vancouver would have vertical farms coming up, and agriculture, which is the mainstay of the Canadian economy, would be in tatters. So neither from the trade point of view, nor from the human rights point of view, it is good. As a matter of fact, honestly, free trade with China impinges on the Canadian sovereignty, because already, because of the Chinese intervention, the land prices and the house prices in Vancouver and Toronto have gone out of the roof. If that is a precursor to what we can have, then no sane person should even think of a free trade with China. And that's why you would find that the most of the advanced countries don't have free trade with China. European Union doesn't have. America doesn't have. Bilateral trade is fine. Fair trade is the need of the day. We need fair trade. Fair trade means that the present imbalance of payments and present imbalance of trade is rectified. So fair trade, yes. Free trade, no. If we want to stand by our values, the so-called Canadian values of justice, of the protection of human rights, if we want to uphold the democratic principles, if we want the freedom of the press, if we are in internet freedom, and China is the worst in the internet freedom, and in case we want to sustain our own industry and agriculture, then free trade with China is definitely not the answer. Thank you.